At a luxury restaurant, my son-in-law poured a bucket of leftovers over my head and laughed. "That's what you deserve." My daughter said, "He's right, Dad." I said nothing. I just wiped my face and left. But before leaving, I made one quick call. What happened next? They never forgot. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into Le Bernardin that Tuesday evening. My daughter Emma barely looked up when I approached their table, her manicured fingers scrolling through her phone with that practiced indifference I had grown accustomed to over the years. Marcus, my son-in-law, was leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, swirling his wine glass with the kind of arrogance that comes from believing you've earned something you never worked for. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of Manhattan's elite. Crystal glasses caught the warm light from the chandeliers, and the scent of truffle and expensive perfume hung in the air. This was supposed to be a celebration dinner. Emma had called me 3 days earlier, her voice unusually sweet, asking if I wanted to join them for dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. Looking back, I should have questioned why she was being so generous with an invitation to a place that charged $450 for a meal. "Dad, you're late," Emma said without lifting her eyes from her screen. She was wearing the pearl necklace I had given her for her wedding, the one that had belonged to her mother. Seeing it around her neck used to fill me with warmth, but tonight it felt like a mockery. "Traffic was heavier than expected," I replied, settling into the chair across from them. At 64, my joints weren't what they used to be, and the long day at the office had left me more tired than usual. I had been managing some final details for the Coleman Properties quarterly reports. Though Emma and Marcus assumed I spent my days playing chess in the park like some forgotten retiree. Marcus finally acknowledged my presence with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Richard, good to see you." His tone carried that false familiarity that always set my teeth on edge. Emma and I were just discussing our plans for the summer house renovation. I nodded politely, though something about the way he said, "our plans," bothered me. The summer house had been in my family for 30 years. I had bought it with my own money from my own company, but somehow Marcus spoke about it like he had earned it. The waiter appeared beside our table, professional and efficient. "Good evening, sir. Would you care for something to drink?" "Just water, please," I said, noticing how Marcus rolled his eyes at my modest choice. "Come on, Richard," Marcus said, his voice louder now, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Live a little. Order some wine. You can afford it, right?" There was something cruel in his laugh, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Emma finally put down her phone and looked at me with that expression I had learned to dread. It was the same look she used to give me when she was 16 and wanted something expensive. "Dad, Marcus and I wanted to talk to you about something important." I felt my chest tighten. In my experience, conversations that started with something important rarely ended well. "What's on your mind?" Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table, completely ignoring basic etiquette. "We've been thinking about your living situation, that big house in Westchester, all those stairs. At your age, don't you think it's time to consider something more manageable?" The words hit me like a slap. My home, the house where I had raised Emma, where Margaret and I had spent our happiest years, where every room held memories of a lifetime. "I'm quite comfortable where I am, thank you." "But Dad," Emma chimed in, her voice taking on that whining quality that used to make Margaret shake her head in disappointment. "The maintenance costs, the property taxes, wouldn't it be better to sell and move somewhere smaller, maybe one of those nice senior communities?" I stared at my daughter, this woman I had sacrificed everything for, trying to process what I was hearing. "Emma, I built that house with my own hands. Your mother chose every piece of furniture. I'm not ready to give that up." Marcus laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. "Ready? Richard, you're 64 years old. How much time do you think you have left to enjoy anything?" The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around us, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I felt my face flush with a combination of embarrassment and rage that I hadn't experienced since I was a child. Besides, Emma added, her voice casual as if she were discussing the weather. Marcus and I could really use the extra space. Our apartment is getting cramped, and with his promotion at the firm, we deserve something bigger. That's when it clicked. This wasn't concern for my welfare. This was a business transaction. They wanted my house, my life's work handed over to them like some kind of inheritance they could claim while I was still breathing. The waiter returned with our appetizers, setting them down with practiced silence. The food looked exquisite, but my appetite had completely disappeared. I watched as Marcus picked up his fork and began eating with the same entitlement he brought to everything else in his life. "You know, Richard," Marcus said between bites, "Emma told me about your little real estate hobby back in the day. Must have been nice playing businessman when the market was so easy." My hands clenched under the table. Little hobby. 40 years of building Coleman Properties from nothing into one of the most successful real estate development companies in New York, and he called it a hobby. "I did well enough," I said quietly, trying to maintain some dignity. "Well enough," Marcus repeated, laughing. "That's modest of you, though I suppose when you're dealing with small residential properties, the stakes aren't that high, are they?" Small residential properties. If he only knew that Coleman Properties owned half the buildings he walked past every day on his way to work. If he only knew that the very job he was so proud of existed because I had made a single phone call to an old friend. Emma was watching me with those cold blue eyes she had inherited from her mother, but without any of Margaret's warmth. "Dad, you're being selfish. Think about what's practical." Selfish. The word echoed in my mind as I sat there, surrounded by the opulence of a restaurant I could buy with pocket change, listening to my own daughter call me selfish for wanting to keep the home I had built. That's when Marcus stood up. I thought he was going to excuse himself, perhaps visit the restroom. Instead, he walked around to the server's station and returned with a small plastic container. My blood turned to ice when I realized what it contained. "You know what, Richard?" Marcus said, his voice loud enough now that several other diners were turning to look. "I think you need a reality check about your place in this family." Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, Marcus upended the container over my head. Leftover food from other tables' plates cascaded down my face and onto my shirt. Bits of fish, sauce, breadcrumbs, and God knows what else coated my hair and dripped onto the pristine white tablecloth. The restaurant fell completely silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing and the wet plop of food hitting the floor. I could feel the stares of everyone around us, the mixture of horror and fascination that comes from witnessing someone's complete humiliation. "That's what you deserve, old man," Marcus said, his voice triumphant. "Maybe now you'll understand who's really in charge." I looked at Emma, praying that she would show some sign of the daughter I had raised, some flicker of the love I thought we shared. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "He's right, Dad. It's time you learned your place." I sat there for what felt like an eternity, food sliding down my face, my shirt ruined, my dignity shattered in front of a room full of strangers. The smell of the mixed leftovers was overwhelming, and I could taste the bitter combination of flavors on my lips. Slowly, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, whether from rage or humiliation, I couldn't tell. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus was still laughing, enjoying his moment of triumph. Emma had returned to her phone as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Neither of them paid attention as I pressed the call button. "James," I said quietly when the call connected. "It's Richard. Yes, I know it's late. I need you to execute the documents we discussed last month, all of them. Tonight." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I stood up, wiped my face with the cloth napkin, and looked at both of them one last time. "Enjoy your dinner?" I said, my voice steady despite everything. "I have a feeling it's going to be your last meal this expensive for quite a while." I walked out of Le Bernardin with as much dignity as a man covered in leftover food could manage. Behind me, I heard Marcus's laughter echoing through the dining room, and Emma's voice saying something about dramatic old men. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. They thought they were dealing with a weak, confused old man who could be bullied into submission. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The cool Manhattan evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, and for the first time in months, despite everything that had just happened, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up in my Westchester home feeling more rested than I had in months. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the bedroom Margaret and I had shared for 25 years, illuminating the family photos that Emma probably thought were worthless sentimental clutter. I showered, put on my favorite navy suit, and drove into Manhattan with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Margaret's death. James Morrison had been my attorney for over 30 years. His office on Wall Street occupied an entire floor of a building I had sold him at below market value back in 1995 when he was just starting his practice. Now at 68, he was one of the most respected estate attorneys in New York, and one of the few people who knew exactly how extensive my holdings really were. "Richard," he said as I entered his office, his weathered face creasing with concern, "are you sure about this? Once we execute these documents, there's no going back." I settled into the leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk, the same desk where we had planned Margaret's estate and drafted Emma's trust fund documents 15 years ago. "I'm certain, James. Last night confirmed what I've suspected for months. They don't see me as family, they see me as a resource to be exploited." James opened the thick folder that contained documents we had been preparing for 6 months. I had hoped I would never need to use them, but after last night's humiliation, there was no choice. "Let's review what we're doing, just so we're clear." He pulled out the first set of papers. "Emma's trust fund termination, $5 million that will revert to your estate immediately. She's been drawing $15,000 per month from this for the last 8 years. I nodded. Emma had always assumed that money came from some mysterious investment Margaret had left her. She never questioned why a teacher's widow would have that kind of inheritance. The truth was, I had been funding her lifestyle entirely, while she treated me like an inconvenience. "The apartment lease termination," James continued, $8,000 per month for that Upper East Side place. The lease is in your name, though she believes Marcus secured it through his connections. That had been one of my more elaborate deceptions. When Emma and Marcus got married, they couldn't afford anything better than a studio in Queens. I had quietly arranged for them to sublet the Fifth Avenue apartment from a shell company I controlled. For 13 years, they had lived in luxury while believing Marcus was a successful enough attorney to afford such an address. "The employment termination," James said, his voice growing quieter. "This one might be the most devastating. Marcus Harrison's position at Caldwell, Hartman & Associates. Senior partner, $120,000 per year." I had to smile at that one. Marcus thought he had earned his position through talent and hard work. He had no idea that David Caldwell and I had been college roommates, or that I had invested $2 million in David's firm when he was struggling to keep it afloat in 2008. All it had taken was one conversation about giving a promising young attorney a chance, and Marcus had found himself fast-tracked to a partnership he never deserved. "And finally," James said, sliding the last document across the desk, "the asset transfer to the Margaret Coleman Foundation, $200 million in liquid assets, plus the deed transfers for the summer house, the Manhattan penthouse you've kept secret, and the Westchester property." I picked up the pen, a Mont Blanc that Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. My hand was steady as I signed each document, ending with my full signature on the foundation paperwork. Margaret had always wanted to help children who had lost parents. Now she would, just not in the way we had originally planned. "Richard," James said softly, "you're essentially disinheriting your only child. Are you prepared for the consequences?" I set down the pen and looked out the window at the city I had helped build. 43 years ago, I had started Coleman Properties with a $15,000 loan and a dream. I had worked 18-hour days, missed Emma's school plays and soccer games, all so she could have the kind of security I never had growing up. I had given her everything, and in return, she had given me contempt. "James, let me tell you something about consequences. Last night, my daughter sat in a restaurant and watched her husband pour garbage over my head. She told me I deserved it. She looked me in the eye and said it was time I learned my place. I stood up and walked to the window. Well, she's about to learn something about consequences herself. After leaving James's office, I drove to Coleman Properties headquarters on Park Avenue. The building was 42 floors of glass and steel, a monument to 4 decades of strategic acquisitions and development deals. Most people saw the Coleman Properties sign and assumed it was just another mid-sized real estate company. They had no idea that we controlled over $3 billion in Manhattan property alone. My assistant, Patricia, had been with the company for 28 years. She was one of the few people who knew that my retirement 8 years ago had been purely for tax purposes and family peace. I still controlled every major decision, every acquisition, every development project. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," she said as I walked past her desk. "Your 9 o'clock appointment with the Meridian Group is confirmed and the Henderson project contracts are ready for your review." I paused at her desk. Patricia had watched Emma grow up, had seen her come to the office as a child and marvel at the city view from my window. She had also witnessed Emma's transformation from a sweet little girl into the entitled woman who now saw her father as nothing more than an ATM. "Patricia, I need you to make some calls. First, contact David Caldwell. Tell him I need to see him this afternoon about the Harrison matter. Second, call the management company for the Fifth Avenue property and inform them that the lease for apartment 12B will not be renewed. Third, contact Citizens Bank and inform them that the Coleman Foundation will be assuming control of the accounts we discussed last month." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had been expecting this conversation for months. "Of course, Mr. Coleman. Anything else?" "Yes. Clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I want to personally oversee the transition of these accounts." I spent the afternoon in my office, reviewing the cascade of changes that would begin within hours. Emma's monthly trust fund payment was scheduled to process tomorrow. Instead of $15,000, she would receive a notice that the trust had been dissolved. The apartment rent, which she believed Marcus paid, would simply stop being covered. Within 30 days, they would receive an eviction notice. But the employment situation was the most delicate. Marcus had to believe he was losing his job through normal business circumstances, not because of any connection to me. I had learned over the years that the most effective revenge was the kind that looked like natural consequences. At 3 o'clock, David Caldwell knocked on my office door. He was a tall, thin man with graying temples who had built his law firm into one of Manhattan's most prestigious practices with my quiet financial backing. "Richard," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Patricia said you wanted to discuss Marcus Harrison." I had known this conversation would be difficult. David considered Marcus a valuable employee, unaware that his success was entirely artificial. "David, I need Marcus removed from the firm. Quietly, professionally, but permanently." David's eyebrows rose. "Richard, that's a significant request. Marcus is up for senior partner this year. He's brought in some major clients." "The clients he brought in," I said carefully, "were introduced to him through connections he doesn't realize came from me. The Pemberton account, the Riverside Development deal, even the Metropolitan Museum contract. All of those came through my network, not his talent." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I've documented every client Marcus has claimed credit for, along with the actual source of each introduction. If you review this, you'll find that Marcus Harrison has never actually generated a single dollar of legitimate business for your firm." David took the folder and began reading, his expression growing more troubled with each page. After 20 minutes, he looked up at me with something approaching horror. "Richard, if this is accurate, then Marcus has been taking credit for your business development for over a decade." "It's accurate. I kept detailed records because I wanted to understand exactly how much of his success was real versus manufactured." I leaned forward. "David, I'm not asking you to destroy the man. I'm asking you to stop artificially supporting him. removed the accounts that came through me, stopped giving him the preferential treatment I requested, and let him succeed or fail on his own merits. David closed the folder and sat back in his chair. Without these accounts, Marcus would be lucky to qualify for junior associate, let alone partner. Then that's what he deserves. That evening, I drove home to Westchester and sat in Margaret's garden, watching the sun set over the property we had built together. This house held 36 years of memories. Emma's first steps on the living room carpet, her high school graduation party on the back patio, the Christmas mornings when she still believed in magic and family love. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I had taken at Emma's wedding 13 years ago. There she was, radiant in her white dress, dancing with Marcus while I watched from the sidelines. Even then I had seen something calculating in Marcus's eyes, something that made me uncomfortable. But Emma loved him, and I had convinced myself that love would be enough. The phone rang in my hand, startling me from my memories. Emma's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dad?" Her voice sounded strange, almost uncertain. "I just wanted to call and, well, about last night. Maybe we were a little harsh." "A little harsh?" I almost laughed. "What's prompted this change of heart, Emma?" "I don't know what you mean. I just think we should talk. Maybe have lunch this weekend. You could come see our apartment and we could discuss your housing situation like adults." I knew exactly what this was about. Someone had called someone, and word was starting to filter through their social circle that something was changing. In Manhattan's elite circles, information traveled fast, especially when it involved money and real estate. "Emma," I said quietly, "I think our conversation last night made your feelings perfectly clear. You and Marcus want my house, my assets, and my compliance with your plans. What you don't want is me." "Dad, that's not true. We love you. We're family." Family. The word that had lost all meaning when she sat there and watched her husband humiliate me in public. "Emma, do you remember when you were 8 years old and we went to the Central Park Zoo together? You got scared of the sea lions and I carried you on my shoulders so you could see them safely?" There was a long pause. "Yes, I remember. You told me that day that you would always love me more than anyone in the world. You said I was the strongest, kindest daddy anyone could have." I felt my voice catch slightly. "What happened to that little girl, Emma?" "People grow up, Dad. Relationships change. That doesn't mean we don't care about you." People grow up. As if becoming an adult meant becoming cruel. As if maturity required abandoning love and loyalty. You're right, Emma. Relationships do change. And sometimes when they change enough, they end. "What do you mean?" I looked at Margaret's rose bushes, still blooming despite the fact that no one had tended them since her death 15 years ago. Some things endured through neglect and abandonment, others didn't. "I mean that actions have consequences, Emma. You and Marcus made your choice last night. Now you get to live with it." I hung up the phone and went inside. Tomorrow the real consequences would begin. 3 days after my humiliation at Le Bernardin, the first domino fell exactly as I had planned. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing the morning financial reports from Coleman Properties when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, and for the first time in years, I actually smiled when I saw his name. "Richard?" His voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "I need to talk to you. Something's happened at the firm." I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my leather chair, the same chair where I had conducted billion-dollar real estate deals for over 2 decades. "What kind of something, Marcus?" "I've been let go." The words came out in a rush. David Caldwell called me into his office this morning and said they were restructuring the partnership track. He said the firm was moving in a different direction and my position was being eliminated. I made appropriate sympathetic sounds while mentally reviewing the conversation I'd had with David 2 days earlier. "That seems sudden. Did he give you any specific reasons?" "That's just it. Marcus said, his voice rising with frustration. He was vague about everything, said something about client relationships and business development not meeting expectations, but Richard, I brought in the Pemberton account just last year. The Riverside development deal was worth $3 million in fees. How can they say I'm not meeting expectations? Poor Marcus. He still had no idea that every major client he'd ever claimed credit for had been handed to him through my connections. The Pemberton account came through Margaret's college roommate, whose husband sat on their board of directors. The Riverside deal was a favor to an old friend who owed me considerably more than $3 million in professional courtesies. Have you spoken to Emma about this? I asked, genuinely curious about how my daughter was handling the first crack in their carefully constructed facade. Marcus paused, and I could hear him struggling to find the right words. She's not taking it well. She keeps asking how we're going to maintain our lifestyle, what we're going to tell our friends. Richard, I need your advice. You've been in business longer than anyone I know. What would you do? The irony was almost overwhelming. The man who had humiliated me in public 3 days ago was now asking for my help. But I had learned patience over the years, and the best revenge was always served with a smile. Marcus, the legal field is competitive. Sometimes these things happen through no fault of your own. Have you considered looking at smaller firms? Perhaps something outside Manhattan? Outside Manhattan? Marcus sounded horrified. Richard, do you know what my reputation is worth in this city? I can't just start over at some strip mall law office in Queens. His reputation. The reputation I had built for him through decades of careful networking and strategic introductions. Well, perhaps something will turn up. These things have a way of working themselves out. After Marcus hung up, I called Patricia at the office. How are the Fifth Avenue arrangements proceeding? The management company has been notified that the lease won't be renewed. They've been instructed to begin showing the apartment to new prospective tenants starting next week. The current occupants have been informed they have 30 days to vacate. I felt a small pang of guilt about the apartment. Emma had fallen in love with that space the moment she walked into it 13 years ago. The view of Central Park from the living room windows, the marble floors, the crown moldings that reminded her of the grand homes she'd visited as a child. She had no idea that the monthly rent of $8,000 was more than Marcus made in take-home pay, or that I had been covering the difference through a complex arrangement of shell companies and management fees. And the trust fund termination? Processed yesterday morning, Miss Emma received the notification by certified mail. The final payment was deposited, along with a letter explaining that the trust had been dissolved according to the terms established in the original documents. I had drafted those trust terms very carefully 15 years ago. The fund could be dissolved at any time if the beneficiary demonstrated conduct inconsistent with the values and intentions of the trust creator. I doubted Emma had ever bothered to read the fine print. That afternoon, I drove into Manhattan for a meeting with the board of the Margaret Coleman Foundation. We met in a conference room overlooking Central Park, in a building I had purchased in 1988 and renovated into office space for nonprofit organizations. The foundation's mission was to provide educational support for children who had lost parents, something Margaret and I had discussed extensively before her death. Sarah Williams, the foundation's director, spread out the financial documents across the polished conference table. Mr. Coleman, with the $200 million endowment you've established, we can provide full scholarships for approximately 800 children over the next 20 years. The impact will be extraordinary. I nodded, reviewing the allocation plans. Margaret always believed that education was the greatest gift you could give a child. She would be thrilled to know that her memory will help so many young people build better futures. There is one question, Sarah said hesitantly. The media will eventually notice such a large donation. Are you prepared for publicity about your philanthropic activities? I had considered this carefully. In Manhattan social circles, a $200 million charitable donation would generate significant attention. Emma and Marcus would eventually learn that I had given away an amount of money that dwarfed their wildest expectations of inheritance. I prefer to keep my charitable giving private," I said. "But I understand that complete anonymity may not be possible with a donation of this size." That evening I was preparing dinner in my kitchen when Emma called. I could tell immediately from her voice that she had received the trust fund termination notice. "Dad, I got the strangest letter today from some law firm I've never heard of. They're saying my trust fund has been terminated. There has to be some mistake." I continued slicing vegetables for my salad, a habit I had developed since Margaret's death. Cooking for one required different skills than the family meals we used to share. What did the letter say exactly? Something about conduct inconsistent with trust values. "Dad, this doesn't make sense. That trust fund was Mom's money. You can't just take it away." I set down my knife and walked to the living room window, looking out over the property Margaret and I had landscaped together. "Emma, that trust fund was established with my money in your mother's memory. The legal documents were very clear about the conditions under which it could be terminated." "Conditions? What conditions? Dad, Marcus just lost his job and now this? It's like everything is falling apart at once." The panic in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time in her adult life, Emma was facing the possibility of actual financial consequences. She had lived for so many years in the bubble I had created for her, where money appeared automatically and problems solved themselves, that she had never learned to cope with real adversity. "Emma, perhaps this is an opportunity for you and Marcus to become more self-reliant. Many couples manage to live comfortably on much less than what you've been accustomed to." "Self-reliant?" Her voice rose sharply. "Dad, do you have any idea what our monthly expenses are? The apartment alone costs $8,000. Then there's the car payments, the country club membership, the insurance. Marcus needs to maintain a certain image for his career." What career? I thought, but kept that observation to myself. "Emma, people adjust their lifestyles to match their income all the time. It's not the end of the world." "You don't understand," she said, her voice becoming desperate. "We can't just move to some tiny apartment in Queens. Our friends, our social circle, everything we've built depends on maintaining a certain standard of living." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. Everything they had built, as if any of their lifestyle had been earned rather than given, as if the standard of living she was so desperate to maintain hadn't been funded entirely by my generosity. "Emma, 3 days ago, you and Marcus made it very clear that you consider me a burden, an embarrassment, someone who needed to learn his place in your family. Now you're calling me for help, because that same lifestyle is threatened." There was a long silence. When Emma spoke again, her voice had changed, become softer, more manipulative. "Daddy, I'm sorry about the other night. Marcus was stressed about work and I was tired. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings." Hurt my feelings. As if having food dumped over my head in a public restaurant was merely a minor social faux pas. As if watching my own daughter approve of my humiliation was just a misunderstanding. "Emma, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about respect. This is about the fact that you've spent years taking my support for granted while treating me like an inconvenience." "That's not true, Dad. We love you. Your family." Family doesn't humiliate each other in restaurants, Emma. Family doesn't conspire to take each other's homes. Family doesn't tell their parents to learn their place. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that once would have broken my heart. But I had learned something important over the past few days. Sometimes love meant allowing people to face the consequences of their choices, even when those people were your own children. "Dad, please, can't we work something out? Maybe I could come over this weekend and we could talk things through, just you and me, like old times." Like old times. When she was 8 years old and thought I could solve any problem, fight any monster, make everything better with just a hug and a promise, before she learned that seeing me as weak and pathetic was more profitable than seeing me as someone who loved her. "Emma, the decisions have been made. The trust fund termination is permanent. The documents were filed 3 days ago, and they cannot be reversed." 3 days ago? Her voice went very quiet. "Dad, 3 days ago was Tuesday, the night we had dinner at Le Bernardin." I didn't confirm or deny her calculation. Sometimes the most powerful statements were made through silence. "You planned this," she whispered. "You sat there and let Marcus humiliate you, and you had already planned this whole thing." "No, Emma. I hoped until the very last moment that you would remember who I was, what I meant to you, what we meant to each other. I hoped you would stand up for me, or at least show some basic respect for the man who raised you and supported you your entire life. But when you didn't, when you looked me in the eye and told me I deserved to be humiliated, that's when I made the call to my attorney." Emma's crying became louder, more desperate. "Dad, you can't do this. We're your family. We're all you have." I walked to the mantel where Margaret's photograph sat surrounded by pictures of Emma as a child. Happy memories of birthday parties and family vacations and quiet Sunday mornings when we were actually a family who loved each other. "No, Emma, you're all I had, and you decided that wasn't enough." I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. Outside, the sun was setting over the gardens Margaret had planted 20 years ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for Emma and Marcus, as they discovered just how extensively their lives had been supported by my invisible hand. But for tonight, I was finally at peace with the choices I had made. By Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the humiliation at Le Bernardin, Emma was standing at my front door. I watched her through the living room window as she got out of her car, noting how different she looked from the confident woman who had sat smugly in that restaurant just 7 days earlier. Her designer clothes were the same, but something had changed in her posture, in the way she moved. The absolute certainty that had defined her for so many years was gone. I let her ring the doorbell 3 times before I answered. When I opened the door, Emma's eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. She was holding a thick envelope in her hands, and I could see her fingers trembling. "Dad, please, we need to talk." I stepped aside and let her in, noticing how she looked around the house as if seeing it for the first time. This was the home where she had grown up, where every room held memories of the family we used to be. But now, she was looking at it with different eyes, calculating eyes, seeing not memories but assets. "The living room or the kitchen?" I asked, as if she were a stranger rather than my daughter. "Kitchen," she said quietly, "like when I was little and you'd help me with homework." We sat at the kitchen table where Margaret had served thousands of family meals, where Emma had blown out candles on 18 birthday cakes, where we had shared our last breakfast together before she left for college 20 years ago. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air and highlighting the exhaustion on Emma's face. She set the envelope on the table between us. "Dad, I got the eviction notice yesterday. 30 days to vacate the apartment, and Marcus. Marcus found out that all his major clients were connected to you somehow. He's not just unemployed, he's basically blacklisted." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot I had made earlier, not offering Emma any. Small gestures of hospitality required a foundation of respect, and that foundation had been destroyed 7 days ago. "How did he discover the client connections?" I asked, genuinely curious about which thread had unraveled first. "David Caldwell told him." Emma's voice was flat, defeated. "He said Marcus had never actually brought in any legitimate business, that every major account had been arranged through your network. Marcus came home and threw things. He broke Mom's crystal vase, the one you gave her for your anniversary. The vase Margaret had loved so much, destroyed in a fit of rage by a man who had never earned anything in his life. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice even. "And what did Marcus expect you to do about this information?" Emma looked down at her hands, avoiding my eyes. "He wants me to convince you to reinstate the trust fund and help him get his job back. He says you're manipulating the situation out of spite, and that family should forgive and forget." Forgive and forget, the rallying cry of people who had never truly apologized for their actions. "And what do you think, Emma?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at the envelope in front of her. When she finally looked up, I saw something in her expression that reminded me of the little girl she used to be, before entitlement and manipulation became her primary tools for navigating the world. "I think I never really knew who you were," she said softly. "I thought you were just my dad, retired, living off your pension and Social Security. I had no idea about Coleman Properties, about the connections, about any of it." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman my daughter had become. "Emma, did you ever wonder how a retired real estate agent could afford to maintain a house like this? Did you ever question how your mother, an elementary school teacher, could have left you a trust fund worth $5 million? Her face flushed red. I assumed you had been smarter with money than most people, maybe some good investments, some luck with the stock market. You assumed what was convenient to assume," I corrected her. "You never asked questions because you didn't want answers that might complicate the narrative you had built about your life." Emma opened the envelope and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Dad, I've been doing research all week. Coleman Properties isn't just some small real estate company. You own half of Manhattan." I said nothing, letting her process the reality she had chosen to ignore for so many years. "The Meridian Tower, the Riverside Complex, the Harbor Point development, your signature is on all of them. Dad, you're worth—" She paused, struggling with the numbers. $300 million, maybe more?" "More," I said simply. Emma stared at me as if I were a stranger. "Why did you hide this? Why did you let us think you were just getting by on a pension?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Margaret had spent countless hours nurturing roses that still bloomed 15 years after her death. "Because I wanted to know who you really were, Emma. Not who you were when you thought you could inherit my wealth, but who you were when you thought I was just an ordinary father who loved you." "And now you know," she whispered. "Now I know." I turned back to face her. "I know that you're willing to humiliate me in public when you think I'm weak. I know that you'll conspire with your husband to take my home when you think I'm vulnerable. I know that you see me as an obstacle to your lifestyle rather than as someone who deserves your respect." Emma's shoulders shook as she started crying again. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. About the restaurant, about the house, about not appreciating what you've done for us." I had been waiting for this apology for a week, but now that it came, it felt hollow. "Emma, you're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about the consequences." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "That's not true. I love you, Dad. You're my father." "I was your ATM," I said quietly. "The moment you thought the money stopped flowing, you decided I was expendable." I walked back to the table and sat down across from her. "Emma, let me tell you what's going to happen. The trust fund termination is permanent. The apartment lease will not be renewed. Marcus will not get his job back, and I will not be providing any financial assistance to help you maintain the lifestyle you think you deserve." "Dad, please!" I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished. I've transferred the bulk of my estate to the Margaret Coleman Foundation. $200 million will go toward providing college scholarships for children who have lost parents, children who understand what it means to value the people who love them." Emma's face went white. $200 million? Dad, that's my inheritance. That's, my children's inheritance. "Your inheritance was dependent on you being worthy of it," I said. "You've proven that you're not." She leaned across the table, her voice becoming frantic. "What about the house? What about the summer place in the Hamptons? What about Mom's jewelry?" "The house and the summer property have been transferred to the foundation as well. Margaret's jewelry." I paused, thinking about the pearl necklace Emma had worn to dinner 7 days ago. "Margaret's jewelry will go to someone who understands its sentimental value, not just its monetary worth." Emma stared at me in shock. "You're giving everything away? Everything I was supposed to inherit?" "Everything you assumed you would inherit," I corrected. "Emma, you never earned any of this money. You never worked for it, never sacrificed for it, never even showed basic gratitude for it. Why would you deserve to inherit it?" She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "Because I'm your daughter, because blood matters, because family takes care of family." I stood up as well, meeting her eyes directly. Family does take care of family, Emma. For 36 years, I took care of you. I built a company, earned a fortune, and shared it with you generously. And when I needed you to show me even basic respect, you chose to humiliate me instead. One mistake, she shouted. One bad night, and you're punishing me for the rest of my life. One bad night where you showed me exactly who you really are, I replied. Emma, if you had defended me at that restaurant, if you had shown even a moment of loyalty or love, we wouldn't be having this conversation. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? I don't know how to support myself. I've never had to. And there it was, the admission that revealed everything. At 36 years old, my daughter had never learned self-reliance because I had made it unnecessary. I had created her dependence and then been shocked when she resented me for it. Emma, millions of people support themselves every day. They work jobs, budget money, make responsible choices. You can learn to do the same. But I don't know how, she whispered. I felt my heart soften slightly. This was the most honest thing she had said in years. Then you'll figure it out. The same way I did when I was 21 and started my first business with $15,000 and no safety net. She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. Will you help me? Not with money, but with advice? With guidance? I considered her request carefully. Part of me wanted to say yes, to restore some version of our relationship, to help her become the person she should have been all along. But another part of me remembered the look in her eyes when Marcus poured food over my head, the coldness in her voice when she told me I deserved it. Emma, that depends entirely on you. If you can learn to treat me with respect, if you can build a life based on your own efforts rather than my money, if you can become someone worthy of my time and attention, then perhaps we can have some kind of relationship. And if I can't? I walked her to the front door, the same door she had walked through as a child coming home from school, as a teenager bringing friends over, as a young woman announcing her engagement to Marcus. Then you'll have the life you've chosen, and I'll have the peace I've earned. Emma turned at the threshold, her face streaked with tears. Dad, I do love you. I know you don't believe that anymore, but I do. I looked at this woman who had been the center of my world for 36 years, who had been my pride and joy and greatest disappointment. Emma, love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. It's how you treat people when it's difficult, when it's inconvenient, when there's nothing in it for you. You chose not to love me when it mattered most. Now you'll have to live with that choice. I closed the door and walked back to the kitchen, where her research envelope lay scattered on the table. For the first time in a week, the house was completely quiet. No phone calls, no demands, no manipulations, just peace. 2 months after our confrontation in my kitchen, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing the final paperwork for the Margaret Coleman Foundation when James mentioned something that made me pause. Richard, I thought you should know that Emma has been calling the office repeatedly, asking about the possibility of contesting the foundation transfer. She seems to believe there might be legal grounds to challenge your decision. I set down the document I was reading and looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. From this height, the people on the streets looked like ants scurrying about their daily business with no awareness of the larger forces that shaped their lives. What did you tell her? That the transfer was completely legal and properly executed, and that any attempt to contest it would be both expensive and unsuccessful. James leaned forward in his chair. Richard, she also asked if there were any circumstances under which the foundation might be dissolved and the assets returned to your estate. I almost smiled. Even in desperation, Emma was still looking for loopholes, still hoping for some way to regain access to the money she had never earned. And your response? That the only way the foundation could be dissolved would be if you personally requested it, and that such a request would require unanimous approval from the board of directors, all of whom are committed to Margaret's memory and the foundation's mission. Through my network of business contacts, I had been keeping loose tabs on Emma and Marcus's situation. The reports painted a picture of two people who had never learned to live within their means because they had never needed to. They had moved from their Fifth Avenue apartment to a cramped two-bedroom in Queens, a transition that Marcus apparently found deeply humiliating. He had been unable to find employment at any of the major law firms, his reputation having been quietly poisoned by his lack of actual achievements. Emma had attempted to find work, but discovered that her art history degree and complete lack of professional experience made her unemployable at any salary that would support their previous lifestyle. She had taken a job at a small art gallery in Brooklyn, making $32,000 a year, approximately what she used to spend on clothes in a single month. That afternoon, Patricia buzzed my office intercom. "Mr. Coleman, there's a woman here who claims to be your daughter. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." I had been expecting this visit for weeks. Emma's previous attempts at reconciliation had been conducted over the phone or through messages delivered via James. But desperation eventually drives people to more direct action. "Send her up, Patricia, but stay close to your desk in case I need assistance." Emma looked terrible when she walked into my office. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp around her face. Her clothes, while still expensive, showed signs of wear that suggested she wasn't replacing her wardrobe as frequently as before. Most telling of all, she carried herself differently, without the confident entitlement that had defined her for so many years. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the office that represented 4 decades of my work. The mahogany desk where I had signed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the wall of awards and recognitions from various business organizations, the photographs with mayors, governors, and other influential people who had shaped New York's development over the past generation. "I never knew," she said quietly, settling into the chair across from my desk. "All those times you came to my school events, my graduation, my wedding, I thought you were just my dad. I had no idea you were this." I didn't respond immediately. Emma looked smaller somehow, diminished by the reality of her situation. The weight loss was noticeable, but more than that, something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. "Marcus left me last week," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That surprised me. I had expected their relationship to be strained by their financial difficulties, but Marcus had always struck me as too calculating to abandon ship entirely. "Where did he go?" "Back to his parents in Ohio. He said he couldn't handle the humiliation anymore. Said it was my fault that we lost everything because I couldn't control my vindictive father." Emma's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "He took what little money we had left and said I could figure out my own way forward." I felt a small stirring of sympathy for my daughter, but I pushed it aside. Marcus's abandonment was certainly cruel, but it was also predictable. Men like Marcus were loyal only to success and comfort. When those disappeared, so did they. "I'm sorry to hear about your marriage," I said, and meant it. Whatever my feelings about Marcus, I had never wanted Emma to experience the pain of abandonment. "Are you?" she asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Because part of me wonders if this was what you intended all along. Destroy my marriage, my security, my entire life." I leaned back in my chair, considering her accusation. "Emma, I never set out to destroy your marriage. I set out to stop subsidizing a lifestyle that you and Marcus took for granted while treating me with contempt. If your marriage couldn't survive without my financial support, then it was built on a foundation that was always going to crumble." She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was different, more vulnerable than I had heard it in years. "Dad, I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm scared. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live like this." "Like what?" "Like a normal person. Like someone who has to worry about rent and grocery bills and whether they can afford to fix their car when it breaks down." She looked around the office again. "You grew up poor, didn't you? Before all this?" I nodded. "My father was a construction worker. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx until I was 12 years old. I shared a couch with my younger brother until I left for college on scholarship." "How did you do it? How did you build all this from nothing?" It was the first intelligent question she had asked me in years. I worked. Every day for 43 years I worked. I saved money instead of spending it. I invested in opportunities instead of luxuries. I treated people with respect so they would want to do business with me. I learned skills that other people valued. But how did you know how to do those things? How did you know where to start? I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen since she was a child, asking me to explain how something worked. Genuine curiosity, real desire to learn. Emma, no one is born knowing how to be successful. You learn by trying, failing, trying again. You learn by watching people who are successful and figuring out what they do differently. She was quiet again, processing this information. Dad, if I tried to change, if I really worked at becoming someone different, someone better, would you consider helping me? Not with money, she added quickly, but with guidance? I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but what I saw was genuine desperation mixed with something that might have been hope. Emma, what kind of help are you asking for? I don't know how to budget money. I don't know how to interview for jobs or write a resume. I don't know how to fix things when they break, or how to negotiate with landlords, or how to do any of the things that normal adults do. Her voice was shaking now. Marcus always handled the practical things, and before that you handled them. I'm 36 years old and I don't know how to be an adult. This was perhaps the most honest admission I had ever heard from Emma. She was acknowledging not just her current predicament, but the fundamental failure of preparation that had led to it. What would you do with that knowledge if I gave it to you? I would use it to build a life I could be proud of. A life that didn't depend on anyone else's money or anyone else's connections. She paused. A life that might make you proud of me again. I felt something shift in my chest, a small crack in the wall I had built around my heart. Emma, I was never not proud of you because of your career or your income. I stopped being proud of you because of how you treated people, how you treated me. I know. Tears were streaming down her face now. Dad, I know I can't undo what I did at that restaurant. I know I can't take back the things I said or the way I acted. But if I could prove to you that I'm not that person anymore, if I could show you that I learned something from losing everything, would that matter to you? I walked to the window and looked down at the street where I had started my first business 43 years ago. A small storefront that I had rented for $300 a month, where I had worked 16-hour days trying to understand the real estate market that would eventually make me wealthy. Emma, proof isn't words. Proof is consistent action over time. If you want to demonstrate that you've changed, then change. Don't tell me about it, show me. How long would I have to show you? I turned back to face her. As long as it takes for me to believe it's real. She stood up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Dad, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to have dinner with me? Not at some expensive restaurant, just at my apartment. I could cook something simple and we could talk about normal things. The request surprised me. Emma hadn't cooked a meal since high school, as far as I knew. You cook now? I'm learning. YouTube tutorials mostly, and I've been asking my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, for advice. She's been very patient with my disasters. Emma almost smiled. Last week I managed to make spaghetti that was actually edible. For the first time in months, I felt a small spark of hope. Not hope that Emma would suddenly become perfect, but hope that she might become real. Call me next week. If you're still interested in having dinner then, we can arrange something. She nodded and walked toward the door, then turned back. Dad, thank you for not giving up on me completely. I haven't given up on you, Emma, but I'm not going to rescue you either. The person you become next has to be someone you build yourself. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the woman who had just walked out versus the woman who had sat smugly in Le Bernardin 3 months ago. The change was dramatic, but I had learned to be cautious about hope when it came to my daughter. Still, for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like I might not be completely alone in the world. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Patricia's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Coleman, I have Mrs. Rodriguez from the Foundation on line 1. She says there's been an interesting development with one of the scholarship recipients. I picked up the phone, ready to focus on the work that had given my life meaning since Emma had shown me who she really was. But for the first time in months, I was also thinking about what it might mean to have a daughter worth knowing again. 6 months later, I stood in the community center on the Lower East Side, watching 23 young people receive their first Margaret Coleman Foundation scholarships. Sarah Williams had done extraordinary work identifying students who embodied the values Margaret and I had hoped to support. Children who had lost parents but refused to let tragedy define their futures, young people who understood that education was a privilege to be earned rather than an entitlement to be assumed. Maria Santos, 17 years old, had lost both parents in a car accident when she was 14. She had been working part-time jobs while maintaining a 4.0 grade average, planning to attend community college because it was all she could afford. Now she was holding a letter of acceptance to Columbia University with full tuition, room and board covered by the foundation. James Chen, 16, had been living with his grandmother since his father died in a construction accident. His mother had returned to China, unable to cope with life in America without her husband. James had been teaching himself calculus from library books because his school couldn't afford advanced math classes. The foundation scholarship would allow him to attend MIT and study engineering, something he had dreamed about but never thought possible. These young people understood what Emma had never learned. That opportunity was precious precisely because it was rare, and that gratitude was the natural response to generosity. Mr. Coleman, Sarah Williams approached me as the ceremony was winding down. I wanted to thank you again for making this possible. The impact on these children's lives will be immeasurable. I nodded, watching Maria hug her foster mother while they both cried tears of joy. Margaret always believed that education could break any cycle of poverty or disadvantage. I think she would be pleased with the students we've chosen. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice becoming more tentative. Your daughter Emma called the foundation office yesterday. She wanted to know if there were volunteer opportunities available. That surprised me. Emma and I had been having monthly dinners for the past 4 months, simple meals at her small apartment in Queens where she was slowly learning to build a life based on her own efforts rather than other people's money. She had found a better job at a nonprofit art program for underprivileged children, making $38,000 a year, and had started taking business classes at Queens College in the evenings. What kind of volunteer work was she interested in? I asked. Tutoring and mentoring. She said she had experience working with children through her job and that she wanted to give something back to honor her mother's memory. Sarah paused. She also said she understood if the foundation wasn't comfortable with her involvement, given your family situation. I appreciated Emma's sensitivity to the potential awkwardness, but more than that, I was intrigued by her motivation. In the 4 months since Marcus had abandoned her, she had been focused entirely on learning basic life skills, budgeting, cooking, apartment hunting, job searching. This was the first time she had mentioned wanting to help other people. What did you tell her? That I would discuss it with you. The foundation could certainly use additional volunteers, especially people who understand what it means to value educational opportunities. That evening, I drove to Emma's apartment in Queens for our monthly dinner. She lived in a small 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a converted house, a far cry from the Fifth Avenue luxury she had once taken for granted. But when she opened the door, she looked healthier and more peaceful than I had seen her in years. "Hi, Dad," she said, giving me a brief hug. The physical affection was still tentative between us, a relationship being rebuilt from fragments rather than restored to its former state. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, and I could hear something sizzling on the stove. Emma had become a surprisingly decent cook over the past few months, approaching recipes with the same determination she was applying to every other aspect of learning to be self-sufficient. "Sarah Williams mentioned that you called the foundation," I said as she stirred something in a large pot. Emma's shoulders tensed slightly. "I hope that was okay. I know the foundation is important to you and I didn't want to overstep." Why did you want to volunteer there specifically? She turned down the heat under the pot and faced me. Because I finally understand what Mom was trying to teach me, and what you were trying to show me about the value of education and hard work. She paused, searching for the right words. Dad, when I was growing up, everything came so easily. Good schools, nice clothes, college tuition, and then the trust fund. I never had to fight for anything, so I never understood why other people struggled. She ladled pasta into 2 bowls, a simple spaghetti with marinara sauce that would have horrified her 6 months ago, but that smelled wonderful tonight. Now I know what it feels like to wonder if you can afford groceries, to have your credit card declined at the store, to lie awake at night worrying about rent. I know what it feels like to apply for 20 jobs and get rejected by all of them. We sat down at her small kitchen table, the same table where she had cried over bills and budgets during those first difficult months of independence. And you think that understanding qualifies you to help scholarship recipients. I think it qualifies me to understand why the scholarships matter, she said. Dad, do you remember when I was 8 years old and I asked you why some kids at school couldn't afford the same field trips that I could? I nodded. Emma had been troubled by the inequality she observed even as a young child. You told me that money wasn't the most important thing, but that having enough money to pursue your dreams was a kind of freedom that not everyone got to experience. You said that people who had that freedom had a responsibility to use it wisely. She took a small bite of pasta, still not entirely comfortable eating in front of me. I never understood what you meant until I lost that freedom myself. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs that this was another manipulation, another attempt to gain my sympathy or approval through carefully constructed vulnerability. But what I saw was genuine transformation, the kind that comes only through real adversity and honest self-reflection. Emma, if you want to volunteer for the foundation, I have no objection. But I want to be clear about something. Your involvement with the foundation won't change anything about your inheritance or your financial situation. The money that went to the foundation is gone permanently. I understand, she said without hesitation. Dad, I don't want money from you anymore. I want something more valuable than that. What's that? I want your respect. I want to be someone you're proud to call your daughter. We finished dinner in comfortable silence, a vast improvement from the tense conversations of our earlier reconciliation attempts. As I was getting ready to leave, Emma mentioned something that stopped me at the door. Dad, there's something else I wanted to tell you. I've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Catherine Walsh. She specializes in helping people who grew up with privilege learn to develop healthy relationships with money and work. This was perhaps the most encouraging thing Emma had shared with me in months. Recognizing that she needed professional help to unlearn decades of entitlement was a level of self-awareness I hadn't been sure she was capable of. What prompted that decision? Honestly, I realized that I didn't know who I was when I wasn't defined by what other people gave me. Marcus left me. You cut me off financially. And suddenly I was just nobody. I had no idea how to be a person rather than just someone's daughter or someone's wife. She walked me to the door, a ritual we had developed over our monthly dinners. Dr. Walsh has been helping me understand that I spent 36 years avoiding responsibility for my own happiness. I kept expecting other people to provide meaning and security for my life, and then I resented them when they couldn't or wouldn't. I paused at the threshold, struck by the maturity in her words. And what have you learned about taking responsibility? That it's harder than I thought, but also more satisfying. She smiled, a genuine expression of contentment that I hadn't seen on her face since she was a child. Dad, I know I can't go back and be the daughter you deserved when I was younger, but I'm trying to become someone worthy of being Margaret Coleman's daughter now. As I drove home to Westchester, I thought about the evening's conversation and the remarkable change in Emma over the past 6 months. The entitled, manipulative woman who had sat in Le Bernardin and approved of my humiliation was gone, replaced by someone I was only beginning to know. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Sarah Williams. Richard, I thought you'd like to know that Emma's first tutoring session went extremely well. She worked with 2 high school students who are struggling with math, and both of them asked specifically to work with her again next week. How did she approach the tutoring? With remarkable patience and empathy. One of the students, Marcus Rodriguez, has been working part-time jobs to help support his family while trying to maintain his grades. Emma told him about some of her own struggles with learning to balance work and education, and he really connected with that. I smiled at the irony. Emma's greatest weaknesses, her inexperience with real-world challenges, had become strengths in her ability to relate to young people facing similar obstacles. She also mentioned something interesting, Sarah continued. She said she wanted to create a workshop series on life skills for scholarship recipients. Basic things like budgeting, job interviewing, apartment hunting, skills that many of these students will need but might not learn anywhere else. This idea impressed me more than I could express. Emma was taking her hard-won knowledge and transforming it into something useful for others. What did you tell her? That the foundation would be delighted to support such a program if you approved. That evening I called Emma to discuss the workshop proposal. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described her ideas for helping young people navigate the practical challenges of independence. Dad, I know it sounds presumptuous for someone who just learned these skills herself to be teaching them to others, but I think that's exactly why I might be able to help. I remember what it felt like to not know how to do any of these things, to feel overwhelmed and stupid and completely unprepared for adult life. Emma, I think it's an excellent idea. Margaret would be proud to know that her foundation was helping young people in such a practical way. There was a pause on the phone, then Emma's voice softer than before. Dad, do you think she would be proud of me now? The way I am now, I mean. I thought about Margaret, about the woman who had raised Emma with such love and patience, who had died hoping her daughter would grow into someone kind and generous. Yes, Emma, I think she would be very proud of the woman you're becoming. And what about you? She asked quietly. Are you proud of me? I looked around the house, where Margaret and I had built our life together, where we had raised the little girl who was now finding her way back to the values we had tried to instill in her. Yes, Emma, I'm proud of you. For the first time in 15 years, since Margaret's death had left us both lost and grieving in different ways, I felt like I had my daughter back. Not the daughter I had raised with too much money and too little challenge, but the daughter Margaret and I had hoped she would become. Someone who understood that true wealth came not from what you inherited, but from what you built with your own hands and heart. The girl who had once carried food over my head in a restaurant was gone forever. In her place was a woman I was honored to call my daughter.